Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to be ranking the movies of one of my favorite directors working today. He's a director who does not have a ton of films that is out, but his work speaks for itself in its quality. So let's get started ranking all 8 of James Cameron's movies. Welcome once again, my name is Austin, and on this channel we talk about one of my favorite things in the world, movies, and how I tie together my faith with film and everything that's in between. So, James Cameron is one of my favorite directors working today. Like I said, he doesn't have a huge filmography of 20, 30, 40 plus movies. He only has 8 films that have been released in his career. This is an interesting ranking because all of his movies are really good to great. There's no bad movie in his filmography up until this point. Obviously, that is a subjective opinion, so I can certainly in my own camp with that possibly. But I really do love all of his movies. A couple of years ago, I finally went back and watched the movies in his career that I had not seen up until that point. I'll note those in my ranking when I get to them. And so let's start things off with, for me, ranking in 8th place, True Lies. Now, like I said, just because True Lies is in last place does not mean I do not like the movie. I thought it was a great movie. I really enjoyed the action. I'm a huge Arnold Schwarzenegger fan, so I love pretty much anything Arnold Schwarzenegger is in. At least enjoy his presence, his persona, his characteristics, all that kind of stuff. I really enjoyed this one. It had the Arnold Schwarzenegger one-lines. Jamie Lee Curtis gives a really entertaining performance as well. It's cool to see James Cameron play with the spy action hero genre. I thought that was really fun. For me, this is just one that I don't have a ton of nostalgia for because I only just watched it 2 or 3 years ago for the first time, and I've still only seen it once. Once we can officially get some kind of Blu-ray or 4K for it, I definitely plan on picking it up and putting it in my collection and giving it a revisit. But up until then, I've only seen it once, and I did really enjoy it, but the nostalgia's not quite there. So for me, it comes in the 8th slot. Next, coming in the 9th slot, another movie that I don't have a ton of nostalgia for and have only seen once, Titanic. This is James Cameron's one of his most popular films, probably, which is not saying much because most of his movies are extremely popular, especially in the pop culture realm. But this is another one I did not watch growing up. Checked it out a couple of years ago when I was going through his films that I had missed, and I really did love this movie. I thought it was great. I thought Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet were fantastic. They had amazing chemistry on screen together. I'm not usually one into the romantic drama genre, but James Cameron does such a good job with the characters, the backgrounds that they have, the worlds that they're living in, their backgrounds individually as characters, and then just building that relationship. That chemistry is so genuine and authentic on screen, and then getting to see kind of the historical aspect and significance of the film taking place on the ship of the Titanic, and the way that James Cameron incorporates real little stories of different people and heroic moments into the film was really cool and really inspiring, I think. And he took some creative license with stuff, but just the mammoth that is this movie being 3+ hours long, and the fact that it moves at a good pace, you're really engaged throughout the whole thing, you're invested in the story and a lot of the characters that are on the ship. It just comes out for a great movie. So like I said, not very high up on my ranking, but nonetheless still a great film. Next, a movie that I do have some nostalgia for, the first Terminator movie, one of James Cameron's earliest films. I think the Terminator franchise is so cool. I think it's so neat. The lore and the world design for it all, the creature design for the T-800 and T-1000 android robots are so cool. And I really do think that Terminator still stands the test of time, and for the most part, aside from a few effects here and there, still holds up to today. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we move into Terminator 2. Despite its age, I still think it is a really good movie. It's cool to see almost a horror lens through some sci-fi. James Cameron does a really good job at that. And just the brutal nature of the T-800 and another Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. I think he does a fantastic job as a Terminator, one of his most iconic roles and one of my personal favorites as well. So for me, Terminator comes in the 6th slot. Next, coming in the 5th slot, we have the first Avatar movie. I am someone who has always been a fan of Avatar. I saw it when it first came out in theaters back in 2009. I think by the time I saw it, it was 2010, but nonetheless, I always really enjoyed this movie. I've always been blown away by the special effects. I understand that there's not a very strong, unique story, but there is a good story, and there's nothing wrong with taking something familiar and doing it well. But at the same time, because of its familiarity and the tropes that it does follow, it moves it down a little bit more on the list for me. But I still absolutely love exploring the world of Avatar. It's one of my favorite fantasy worlds to just get wrapped up in and lost in as a viewer, and that continued to expand in the sequel film that we finally received this past year. Between the special effects, the world design, the soundtrack, which is one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. I love James Horner's score for this film. This is one of the coolest worlds that we've ever gotten to see in a film, especially a science fiction one. So for me, Avatar comes in the 5th slot. Before I continue with my ranking, don't forget to join me in the comments down below with your personal ranking of the James Cameron directed movies. Next, coming in the 4th slot, we have another one that I don't have a ton of nostalgia for, but when I watched it, it just really connected with me, and I really appreciated the filmmaking that went into it and all these different aspects. So we have The Abyss. So like I said, this is one that I watched a couple of years ago when I was catching up on his filmography, and just from the minute those credits rolled, absolutely loved the movie. I was like, how have I not seen this one sooner? It's, in my opinion, one of his more underrated films. Not as widely known. I think that's partially because the movie's still only on DVD. So as from a collector mindset, it hasn't reached the Blu-ray 4K market yet. But I mean, I love Ed Harris as the main role for this one. I think he's great. It's cool to see him not in a villainous role, but a bit more of a protagonist role is really cool. All of the behind the scenes stuff for this movie is mind blowing. How they made it and filled up hundreds of thousands of gallons of water in these tanks that were old, like nuclear facilities or something like that, and built the set underneath of it, the underwater filming technology. All of it is fantastic, and you just can't bet against James Cameron when it comes to doing things in such a creative and innovative way. He's so good at it. So I absolutely love the movie. I think the story's really cool. I thought the effects were really great and hold up really well. The sci-fi kind of twists and turns that it takes along the way are really interesting. And then it just makes for an overall great movie that I have yet to add to my collection because I'm really holding out for that Blu-ray or 4K from James Cameron. Hopefully we can finally get that amongst True Lies at some point soon, because I'd love to add those to my collection. But for the time being, this movie still hits the 4th slot for me in my James Cameron ranking. Next, in the 3rd slot, as we approach the top 3, reach the top 3, we have his most recent outing, Avatar: The Way of Water. This is a movie, like I said, I've been a fan of the Avatar world and the Avatar movie since it was initially released, and I couldn't wait to see what he did next. I figure with 15 years to continue develop and innovate the technology, as well as work out a really compelling story, I figured he's gonna nail it. And yes, it somewhat has some of the still familiar tropes, but it takes some twists and turns along the way, and it's so focused on the familial aspect. And for me, family is one of the most important things in my personal life that I value more than many other things. And so getting to see that played out on screen through Jake Sully and Neytiri's family as they've grown to continue to love each other, build a life and a family together, I really appreciated the focus on their intimate story and their family that they have on a smaller scale. But then besides that, the special effects are absolutely mind-blowing for this movie. Everything, probably every frame, is photoreal for me. There's just no moment where the effects don't stand up to anything else that comes out today. They're miles above and beyond. Avatar, in some ways, the original, I think, has aged a few ways in a couple of different scenes, partially because of this movie and how it perfected it. So I love this one. It's 3+ hour runtime. Still moves by really quick for me because we get to invest in these new and returning characters. We get to further explore the world of Pandora in different and new and refreshing, no pun intended, ways from the previous film. So I can't wait to see this series continue. I'm fully invested in it. Like I said, Pandora is one of my favorite worlds to just get lost in the film of. So Avatar: The Way of Water comes in the 3rd slot for me. Next, coming in the 2nd slot, we have one of the greatest action movies ever made, Terminator 2: Judgment Day. For me personally, Aliens and Terminator 2 will kind of always be butting heads and going back and forth on my favorite James Cameron movie. It almost comes down to which one I watched last. It takes everything that Terminator did great and blows it up and expands on it. You get a deeper story, deeper, more compelling characters. They do some really interesting stuff, specifically with Sarah Connor in this one and her struggle based on the previous film and the future she knows is to come. John Connor and Arnold Schwarzenegger's T-800 have great chemistry, really funny and interesting on-screen moments between the humor and just the genuine education that John Connor is putting the Terminator through to learn about humanity and just learn what it means to be human. So Terminator 2 will, I think, always, at least up until today, still stand toe-to-toe with most action movies that come out today. The effects still look incredible and hold up really well, and so much of it is practical at the same time, which for me, I have a huge respect and appreciation for practical effects, and I think they will show in the test of time, just like this movie has, being 30 years old, of looking just as good, if not better, than much of the effects and digital heavy stuff we have coming out today. So Terminator 2 Judgment Day comes in the second slot for me. And then finally, as I said, in the number one slot for right now, we have Aliens. So the reason I put Aliens at number one is because I have such an affinity and a love for the Alien franchise. Like I said, Terminator 2 and Aliens are almost interchangeable. I may have watched Terminator 2 a little more recently, but I just had Aliens on my mind when I was putting this list together. And Alien is on my top 10 favorite movies of all time. I think I appreciate the filmmaking of that one a little bit more just in its simplicity compared to this one. But again, just like with Terminator 2 and Avatar: The Way of Water, don't bet against James Cameron with his sequels because he always knocks it out of the park. He takes everything that works about the foundation and the initial laying and just improves upon it in the future. Ridley's story in this one is incredibly compelling and compassionate of her struggle with motherhood and finding that place and that fitting with the events that's taken place and her losses. I have a huge respect and appreciation for that kind of a story within this big action blockbuster. So for me, everything about this movie is incredible. It's one of his greatest, if not his greatest films for me, especially with a huge love that I have for the Alien franchise. So at the time of making this video, Aliens gets the number one slot. So I'd love to hear from you. What's your ranking of James Cameron's eight mainline films that we have received from him as a director? I would love to hear your ranking in the comments down below. Thank you for sticking around for this video. I'll see you in the next one.